This show is brought to you in part by viewers like you who joined a Patreon or become YouTube members. Thank you. And if you could, hit the like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. All right, we have come off of the combine, and any opportunity I get to talk football with my guy, JP ACOSTA, I take it. JP, is the combine the start of the draft process, or is it the climax? Because I like to think that this is when shit gets to be the most ridiculous.
This is the climax. This is not the start. If you're like me, the draft process starts in like November when everybody starts getting eliminated from the playoffs. It's like, all right, now the draft is really starting. But this is when it hits its peak. This is peak silly season. This is peak don't listen to anybody or anything, but listen to everyone and everything. We're getting into pro days. We're seeing like, oh my God, this guy had like a 20-mile-an-hour GPS. This guy, you're going to see a whole lot of like average
Jalen Milroe's
separation
hands
scores.
grow a half inch, right?
Yeah. Like we're gonna get a lot of real stupid stats out there. Like there's one average separation score. So if you hear like someone ask like, "What's his ass rating?" Don't answer. What are you talking about? Ass rating. Don't talk to me about that. But it's fun. It's fun. I'm excited to get back into it.
Yeah, I've heard the Browns are definitely going to take like 12 different quarterbacks in the last 36 hours, right? Like everybody is insistent that is going to be the case, and everything else is smoke around it, right? Like it's just been one of those, especially when the top of the draft is this unsure, right? Because even the guys, like I like Abdul Carter a lot as a prospect, but he's not he's not consensus number one overall guy like Myles Garrett or, somebody else before him. He's kind of in that Aiden Hutchinson kind of lane where it's like he could go one, he could go two. It would make sense there. Not saying that he's not a good prospect, but there's a lot of confusion going on at the top of this draft. A lot of people talking about quarterbacks. I want to ask you a question. If somebody takes a quarterback in the top three, not factoring in positional value, but just how you feel about these quarterbacks as prospects, would you consider it a reach on your board? Like, where do you have these quarterbacks ranked, or do you think they're like top 10 players, and do you think reaching outside the top 10 in the top three is a great idea?
So, for full transparency, I have Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward ranked 28th and 29th on my top 50 big board. I do not think either guy is a surefire like first round prospect. I think both guys are around late first, early second category. I think if you were to rank the prospects from last year's QB class and this year, I think Sanders and Ward would fall right behind JJ McCarthy in terms of where they would slot in the draft cycle. I Regardless of positional value, regardless of a team needing a quarterback, I think grabbing a guy in the top three is a reach. But I think you also have to account for how much, like we said, we can't just throw out positional value when we do a lot of the draft, a lot of the evaluation. And there's the QB tax of if you're a quarterback and you're a third round guy, you're probably going to get taken in a second because everybody wants a quarterback nowadays. If you're a late first, early second guy like Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, you're going to get drafted really early because you have to go get one, especially for teams like the Giants who are now really desperate to go get a quarterback after striking out on Matthew Stafford. I I tend to believe that I don't think either of these guys are super like overwhelmingly like super overwhelming as QB prospects. I think they're probably going to end up being fine to good quarterbacks in the NFL. But compared to last year's class, compared to previous classes over the last decade or so, I don't think this is 2022, where it's Kenny Pickett, but 2014, when there were two quarterbacks first round, Geno Smith fell to the second round. I think that's more the range that we're in right now.
24 was that 2013 or 14?
I think it was 14
was Blake, right? That was when y'all took Blake.
No, that was 15.
That was 15? No, that was 14. 15 was Jameis.
Let's see. Yeah, that 2013. That's what I mean. 13. With,
that was the EJ Manuel. Ooh.
That was EJ and Yeah, EJ Manuel was the only quarterback drafted in the first round.
That begs the question for me, and this is the thing I've been grappling with all draft season, right? A lot of times we talk about drafting a quarterback, and I think what like a quarterback desperate team like the Browns thinks, or at least the fan base thinks, is hey, we won't have to think about quarterback for a little while, right? And I think everybody wants to not think about the quarterback position, right? Everybody wants to be in that position. So even if you could just feel like that for, because that's Sam Darnold's whole value. It's like, hey, for at least like 6 months, you ain't gonna have to think that you need a quarterback, right? Like who knows what after 6 months what that's gonna be. But for me, I want to think a little bit more long term about that proposition of taking a quarterback. What's the worst quarterback prospect that got overdrafted that's actually worked out for the team that drafted them? Like, because that's the problem I run into is like, yeah, you can't, you in quarterback tags, you have to draft these guys earlier. But then I look at the guys, I'm like, Blake Bortles. Well, that didn't really work out for Jacksonville the way that they wanted it to. But it's like, that's probably in the better case scenarios, like, because you get a lot of like Mitchell Trubisky in there, right? EJ Manuel is somebody we brought up whose NFL career a lot of people have largely forgot about. So when you're talking about reaching, when has it worked, right? Like, I think that's the big question in how do you rectify that? Because if you do take a guy, you're like, hey, man, historically, I haven't seen a ton of examples of that being a good thing for that team.
I mean, it's relatively early to say it's a success, but I thought Bo Nix was a reach.
Yeah.
And
I'm
I
worried about
think,
that being like a Mac Jones, right?
yeah, that's the worry. But I think when it comes to bringing in a young quarterback, I think a lot of people think that you draft a quarterback, everything's gonna be great. Immediately comes in, elevates everything. This is Jaden Daniels, this is Andrew Luck, CJ Stroud levels, without realizing that there are only very few of those
Yes.
guys. When you bring in a rookie quarterback, you have to have good play calling, playmaking, and protection up front. A lot of the worst teams in the NFL that are drafting quarterbacks don't have that, you
Mm.
know? So there has to be you either have to be very patient with this guy as you continue to bring stuff around him, or you have to be a team like, I don't know, the Steelers, if they decide to like get real froggy and jump into the like top five, where you can like rationally say, like, yeah, their offensive line was a little injured, but when they come back healthy, there's something there. Their play calling is all right, I guess, depending on what you think of Arthur Smith. Um, even a
They're,
team like the
they're
even
like
a
an
team,
already built team, like there's
yeah, and
something there to tangible to work with. It's not
yeah,
new coach and new everything.
even like the Browns. I think Kevin Stefanski is a very good play caller. I think there's a defense that still has talent on there. I think
Mm-hmm.
if they can iron out the offensive line and figure out what's going on at left tackle, I think that makes a lot of sense. I just worry for teams that don't have this stuff ready and then expect a guy to come in, especially in this class where they need a little bit more help. So I just wonder, do are you ready to actually take on a young quarterback? Like how many quarterback needy teams are actually ready to take on a young quarterback in this league?
Yeah, I think the Bo Nix thing is interesting because I am generally not in favor of reaching for a quarterback. I've seen my team do that too much. And like, I guess it comes down to what you're doing it for, right? Are you drafting a quarterback super early because you want a quarterback? Or are you drafting Bo Nix early because you want Bo Nix, right? Like, I think that distinction does matter. I think that's what Danford did there was like, hey, Sean Payton fell in love with Bo Nix, took him higher than anybody would have took him. And that ended up, at least for now, it's early, working out for them because Sean Payton was like, hey, no, this is my guy. I can work with this. Trust me on this. And that's better to me than like just saying, hey, we got to take one just to take a chance at the position because we really need to solve it. Because now you're just using scratch offs to solve quarterback, right? And you're like
Yeah,
wondering if you want to hit the lottery or some shit and get lucky. And that's just not a way to do it. So I think there is a distinction to be made there about why it is that you reach. I've always said this: if the Browns, if Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski go into this and they say we absolutely need Cam Ward. We have a vision for him. Okay, do what you want it to. Take him. It's a reach, but I feel better about that working out than if they're like, hey man, Deshaun's expensive, our cap situation, we need to get a quarterback under cost control now. Let's just take one. Then I'm like, okay, that's gonna end how we've seen a lot of guys. That's another name on the jersey right there. I can
Yeah.
already guess it. Also, when you take a quarterback this year, you have to factor in that if you take them in the top 3, you're probably taking yourself at the very least out of next year's class. Now, you mentioned you had a late first round grade on these quarterbacks, late first round grade on them. How confident are you when you look at next year's class that you could get a similar level prospect to Shedeur or Cam Ward out of that class? Like, do you think that class should be better? Or is it a situation where it's like last year where it's like, hey, take a guy, right? Because the next year's class doesn't look great.
So I'm actually really high on Cade Klubnik. I think he's gonna be really good. I think he honestly I thought he could have come out this year, but deciding to stay, I think he's gonna enter as my QB1. There's whatever happens with Arch Manning, I think Arch Manning's gonna go through the same thing that Shedeur Sanders has for the most part in this draft cycle. Drew Aller, whatever happens with Drew Aller. I think Lenore Sellers at South Carolina is a really big wild card when it comes to all this. I would say that I'm pretty confident in any of those guys, 2 or 3 of those guys, becoming surefire first rounders than a guy like Shedeur or Cam Ward. I think that they have more physical tools. I think that I have seen a little bit less recklessness from Klubnik as the season went on. Drew Aller had a really good playoff. And then Lenore Sellers is exactly what you want in an NFL quarterback. I would just like to see him in a real offense with a real offensive line. So I think that the 2026 QB class, I mean, Eli Holstein from Pitt is another guy that I'm really intrigued by. I wonder what happens with Nico Iamaleava at Tennessee.
Yeah, he's another wild card, right? Because if he
Big
has like a
wild card.
breakout, right? He was a former #1 overall recruit guy, right?
Yeah, but if you can't make the Tennessee offense work, I don't know what's going on there.
You hold
But
out any hope for Malachi Newell?
no, no. I wish I could, but I don't know, man. I don't know. It's looking shaky. But yeah, I think the 2026 QB class has a little bit more promise than this one in terms of variety, in terms of guys who I think are going to end up being first rounders, and the depth of the class is a lot better.
All right. Well, all that being considered, congratulations, JP. You have just gotten the job as the Cleveland Browns general manager. You have the #2 overall pick. Abdul Carter has gone #1 overall, and don't nobody want to trade up for that #2 overall pick. What is it that you do at 2? You got both quarterbacks. You got everybody on the board except Abdul Carter. What is it that general manager JP does, considering what you feel about next year's class? Let's say you have relatively secure job security too, so you don't feel like you have to draft your way out of a job.
What have I already done in free agency to address the signal caller spot?
You signed Kirk Cousins.
Oh man.
Yeah.
And is this like a Kirk Cousins 1-year deal type thing?
It's basically what the Steelers did with Russ last year. It's Kirk,
man.
and then it's Kirk, and maybe you went out and you signed Kyle Trask to be Justin Fields.
Oh God, man, this is quite the predicament. Largely because I know what I just said about both quarterbacks being more late first guys, but the prospect of a QB room of Kirk Cousins, Deshaun Watson, and Kyle Trask gives me no joy and no hope for the
future. Would it make you feel better if we flip Jacoby Brissett in?
No, not really. It really wouldn't. So, given that that's the free agent move that I make, I would draft a quarterback at 2 if that is the deal. If that's the deal.
What free agent move would you have to make you feel comfortable about not taking a quarterback at 2? Like what trade? I mean, like obviously, like if you did something like got Geno Smith, you're not taking a quarterback at 2, right?
Yeah.
But like, what's the lowest quarterback move you could go down to where you're like, man, I feel like I can stick this out for 1 year, right? Because all we try to do is get 1 year without getting fired.
I think it's Sam Darnold.
You
I
think it's Sam
think
Darnold's the lowest
I
you could
think
go?
I think Sam Darnold's the lowest I can go. I think he actually will work really well in Kevin Stefanski's offense. I think you can give that at least a year while you build up everything else around the offense and around the team. You can try and get off the books on Deshaun's contract and then try again in 2026. But I I wonder if the Browns were really super sold on either of these quarterbacks, why don't they just trade up to one to make sure that they get one?
Yeah.
Like I think everything surrounding what's going to happen with the Titans and the Giants and the Browns at 1, 2, and 3 is really interesting because it feels like they're all like, that scene in the office where everybody's pointing finger guns at each other. It feels like they're all waiting on the first move.
No,
Like
it's
who's
like
gonna
I think somebody on Twitter said everybody's playing. No, I insist. Like,
Yeah, like everybody's like, no, you draft a quarterback. No, you draft a quarterback. No, you draft a quarterback. I feel like the Titans are trying to get somebody. I think the Titans are trying to get Giants to jump from from 3 to 1 to get a quarterback because they're leaking that the Browns really like these quarterbacks, and
the Browns trying to trade up. Yeah,
if we draft one and then they draft one, you don't have Matthew Stafford or a rookie quarterback. But I don't even think that the Titans really want to draft a quarterback in this draft. And if they did want to draft a quarterback, I think it would be Shador.
I think it is very interesting how this pre-draft process has rolled out, right? The rumors, who's leaking the rumors, right? Like who's putting the smoke out there? Because if I'm the Titans, I see a golden opportunity. Because you look at the teams that are likely to trade up for a quarterback. It's not usually like first-year GMs. First-year GMs tend to be, I'm just going to take a guy that's not going to be controversial, right? I think Andrew Berry's first year, he took Jed Wills, which was like the least controversial pick at the time at tackle. You don't usually try to rock the boat that first year unless it is for somebody that you think is just unbelievable, right? And these quarterbacks, I find it hard to believe anybody's going to be at that place with these quarterbacks. So I don't think a lot of names that people have been throwing out there is like, oh, well, the Raiders might want to trade up. I don't know. I think they're going to be a little bit more hesitant. I think they're wait for a quarterback more than like trade up for one. They're going to want to see what happens with that mosh pit at 1 through 3. And I think they feel pretty good if a guy clears through 4 that they can make that move up into like the late part of the top 5. But the two teams where you're like, oh yeah, they're going to be desperate. Got to be New York, right? I mean, just all the embarrassment from NC literally killed the whole concept of NFL in-season Hard Knocks. Multiple just embarrassing clips. Were they the one that had to? No, that was the Jets that had the Jerry Jeudy story pop up about Madden ratings, right?
Yeah, that was the Madden rating. That was the Jets. But I also think the Jets are going to be very desperate for a quarterback.
Like,
I actually think my tinfoil hat theory is that all the stuff about Shador being like a bad character person or like he's not this, that, the other. I think it's the Raiders
that's
trying to leak
peak.
that to make sure he falls to 6 because I think the Raiders love Shador Sanders. Mark Davis was taking Shador to Laker games during the season. It was the clearest, they want Shador. I think Shador wants the Raiders. Now it's just about how you're going to get there without trading up.
Yeah. And like I always say this about Mark Davis. It's ironic his name is Mark because I'm like, he's so easy to scam. He has gotten scammed so many times in the NFL. I'm not saying Shador is a scam, but there is that energy around the Sanders family sometimes that they are putting this thing up. Like, isn't there, don't you feel like you're always looking at Shador through a tilted mirror? Like, it always feels like there's like something going on where like, oh yeah, Shador's going to do East West Shrine Game where he has more control over like what goes on in the practice, or he's not going to do the combine, but he is going to do the pro day. And it's like, y'all always trying to obscure the image of Shador, like, to me, and I don't like it, right? Like, but with like the Raiders, they gonna look at that and be like, yeah, We like they go for that kind of thing. They don't really have a antenna for like when somebody's trying to obscure a picture a little bit. That's the thing that has me like antennas up with Shador, where I'm like, man, it feel like nobody want to just let you take a look at the dude straight up.
It also is worth noting that Tom Brady helped trade Shador Sanders before he entered college. Just, the connections are all there. I think, and I'm actually writing about it for SB Nation, I think a lot of the Shador Sanders stuff is very overblown, especially the
Mm-hmm.
stuff with Dion. I think people are going to say, oh, Dion's going to be really involved, and you don't want to have to deal with Dion and Shador. Bitch, Dion got a job. Like he has like a full-time job coaching a college football team. And not just a college football team, a power four team trying to win the Big 12 championship. Like he has so much more things to do.
Do you
Like
not
this
think
is
that there's a chance that that goes Magic Johnson real quick though, once he doesn't have his son there to because like that's the thing. I'm like, I've never seen him coach without his kids, and this is gonna
sure.
be the first time that he's gonna have to coach. Like, because that's what got him into coaching in the first place. So I'm like, is this like something he genuinely fell in love with, and now he's just gonna keep doing it, or is it something where he's gonna be like, well, the main reason I was doing it ain't really here. Like I'm really interested to see what that is with Dion, because I can see it going either way where he decides, nah, I don't know if I really want to do this, because like coaching in college football sucks, especially
It
when you Deion Sanders.
it
Like,
does, but on the flip side of that, you're Deion Sanders. You
okay,
turned Colorado into a 9-win program in 2 years. You got all of Wu Tang out at the football games. You got
yeah,
all the stars out at Colorado in Boulder, Colorado for football games. He also
ain't even
just
no airport.
recruited. Yeah, there's no airport in Boulder. Y'all, what do you do in Boulder except go to Colorado football games? He also just recruited Julian Lewis, who is a high 4-star, like low 5-star, depending on where you go in the latest recruiting class. I just think that the Deion Sanders stuff is way overblown because I think we're thinking of LeVar Ball, but LeVar Ball did not coach a college basketball team. LeVar Ball was not coaching UCLA. Like Deion Sanders has a job, and his job is not just Shador's dad. It is head coach of Colorado. A
Yeah,
lot of the stuff gets
Dion
real
ain't gonna
like,
be on TV talking shit about you, right? Like that's
yeah,
not
no.
how Dion gonna operate. Dion might be able to get like a position coach fired though. Like I think that there's some credence to like where Dion's gonna be able to talk to ownership, and if he feels like something ain't going right, he might be able to get his hand in that pie. But I don't worry about Deion Sanders as a public relations nuisance, because that's never been the Dion playbook. Is to be a public relations
Yeah,
nuisance. Like it's
that's
always
true.
he plays the game really well. And I think maybe if you're like a GM, like I think if you're a GM, maybe you're a little bit worried about it because you know that he's savvy enough to have to meddle in a way that you can't call out, right? But he's not going to be overt, and he's not going to do anything too crazy. But I do think if like you have a quarterback coach out there and Shador's like, hey man, this guy doesn't know what to do with me, it's not going to be a surprise to me if that guy goes pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I also think that it's hard he does play the game, but it's hard to play both games at
That's true.
once.
That is
It's
true.
hard to invest so much of your time as a college football coach while also like trying to manipulate your way for your son at the NFL level. That's why he coached in college and not the NFL to make sure his son got there. And then like from there, it's on you and the people who you are surrounding yourself with. I I think we give Shador a lot of a bad rep in terms of character stuff because he is Dion's son and made one rap song. But
So did his
every,
dad. Like,
yeah, so did his dad.
and
But everybody that I've spoke to, everybody who was at the Shrine Bowl, has said that there's no character concerns about Shador. Like he's a great locker room guy.
what do
So
people think that Dion did? Because Dion's always been like, he just never been out like a drinker. He's always been like straight edge for
He
the most part of his public. He's been a super no drugs guy. Like, I don't
like
know, the image that people
Dion.
have of Dion. I'm like, I know Dion. I went to school with dudes who had dads like Dion. I'm like,
Dion
that
is
dude
up
is
there
super
with
straight
like
laced. He just wear chains.
Dion
Like,
is up there with like Dabo in terms of Bible thumping.
yeah.
Like he's not like a like character guy. He just is a
He got that
dad who
he got
wears
that hip hop
chains.
preacher vibe going on, right?
Yeah.
Like that. Like, he
Yeah,
definitely
like
leads a couple Bible studies. Like,
like
that's
your dad
definitely
listens to too much Kirk Franklin.
yeah.
You know,
Like, I
like if
don't
Kirk
understand how
Franklin was
people are
a
like, oh, Dion was wild. Like, Dion just, like, he had some fun quotes in the media. Like, he knew how to play the game of it. But Dion was never out here like that. Like, he wasn't out here doing craziness.
yeah,
Um,
Dion was Kirk Franklin if he was a Hall of Fame corner. Like that like, he is not gonna be out here wilding. And
yeah,
it's
like
Deion Sanders.
Dion lead prayer circles like for 30 minutes before the game. Like, I think a lot of that is why he kind of enjoys doing college football, because he has that appeal to people who might be a little bit more troubled, and he can legitimately make a difference in these people's lives. And we've seen it with a couple of guys on that Colorado roster. Like, I think that's kind of how Dion sees himself. And I'm like, usually with a dude like that being your dad, you're not like, oh man, that's his son. And I'm like, the public perception of Dion, it's just such a weird thing to grapple, because I don't know what other people are seeing. Because I look at Dion, I'm like, that man work at the church. Like, what are you
like,
talking about,
like
dog?
yeah, y'all
Like,
y'all think Dion is like on LeVar Ball levels of like manipulative and like being like out loud for his son. I don't even think what LeVar Ball did was that bad. LeVar Ball is every single dad at an AAU basketball game. I know
mhm.
dads like LeVar Ball. That he's fine. I think that he's just being a dad. If you were as good as Lonzo, Lamelo, or if you were as good as Shador Sanders is, and your dad wanted you to play in the NFL or NBA, he would do the exact same thing.
Hey,
Like
look,
it's
if I popped out three,
oh,
three,
we're
three
getting
pro
all of the
athletes, oh
I
yeah, I
y'all
am
ain't no
on the
tell me
front.
none.
Every yes, and I'm going up there
Exactly.
being like, they need to all be on the team. That's a big three. Like,
Exactly. I'm gonna look out to see what the best is for my children. And I
yes,
think Shador again is on the bad side of this rap, but he's a from everything that I've heard, he's a good kid and a good locker room presence.
he's a coach's kid for sure. Like, well, Dion says it all the time. He's the one that stood closest to Dion, and like, that's how I know he was the one not getting in trouble, because you the one stood closest to the preacher man, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
that is the preacher's kid that actually liked being at church, right? Like, that is what Shador Sanders. So I don't really worry about him as a person. My concerns with him are strictly about like, hey man, I just don't think he's athletic enough to
That's
have some of
the
these habits that he has in the NFL.
that's the issue with Shador. I think Shador is just an average athlete, but in watching him over 2023 and in 2024, you can see him start to learn his answers and
Mm-hmm.
learn how to mitigate some of those athletic limitations. I'm not saying that's perfect right now because it's not, but he is still growing. I think over 2023 and 2024, his pressure to sack rate went down, I believe, like 6%, according to Sports Info Solutions. And that's while the Colorado offensive line still is not good. Like that, if you go and watch Colorado games, there is a busted protection on maybe like a quarter of every drop back. Like every four dropbacks, somebody's messing something up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Shador has a ways to go when it comes to pocket manipulation, pocket movement, especially being just an average athlete. But I'm willing to bet on that because it's improving.
Yeah.
Because he's shown that he's grown in these areas. And that's what you want to see. It's not this draft a lot about not what you can do for me now, but what you can become. And while I think Shador's probably going to need time, I think he's growing and he's growing into a well-rounded quarterback. Just get him behind an offensive line that is NFL level.
What do you think the best case scenario for both of these prospects ends up being? Like, where do you think they sit? Are they are they guys who have? I mean, like it's very rare that you have guys like C.J. Stroud has tier one potential. Like there's not very many guys like that. There's like Joe Burrow, there's Lamar Jackson, there's Pat Mahomes. There's like tier two where you're like this upper echelon kind of like what's it? What's the quarterback for the Chargers? I can't believe I'm blanking on this. And Justin Herbert, right? You have that kind of like Justin Herbert level. And then there's like tier three where they're like, they are gonna be your starting quarterback, right? Your Tuas of the world. Where do you put the most likely, like if they get developed, if you put them in a decent situation, where do you put these guys in 4 years based on what they've showed you in college with where they could develop? Because that's also another concern I have of like, hey, you go two overall. What if you spend that on somebody, you do everything right around him, and like you're in the AFC and this guy's like two a class, and that's better than no quarterback, but you're still going to have the same limitations that the Browns have had, which is like, I don't know if you won't get out the first or second round in this era where there's this many tier one guys in the AFC.
I think for both guys, Shador and Cam Ward, if everything maxes out, I think they are both going to be around that tier two. They're
Tier
not going to
two.
be these elite superstar quarterbacks, but they're around, they could possibly get to around QB 11 to like 16.
Do you think, where would you have Dak rated right now?
Oh, I am one of the very few like Dak apologists in the world. I think Dak is a top 10, top 11 quarterback in the league. I
Do
just
you
think he's
think they could surpass where Dak is? That's because I think Dak is like that. He's kind of that line of like, I mean, Dak's good, like, but Dak ain't going to be the reason that you win the Super Bowl. It's got to probably be other things around that team that helps you get there.
I think they'd be a little below. I think
Mm,
with Cam Ward, and the thing with Cam is his pocket play improved, but I also wonder if that's just because he played behind a much better offensive line at Miami than Washington State, because he's still relatively the same player,
mm-hmm.
and he is still going to write checks that his arm or his mind cannot cash,
He be doing
and that's going
cowboy
to
shit.
he he is very reckless and almost to a fault, but sometimes that recklessness works. But I think he also maxes out around that tier two, around the 11 to 16 range. And
Mm.
they both win in different ways, but I can see abilities for them to win in the NFL.
Yeah, I did. I guess another thing I have a hard time rectifying with quarterback at two is the Browns gave up on Baker Mayfield because they decided that the ceiling on him was 11 to 16, right? We need to go get a top five guy. Obviously, it did not work out when they traded for the top five guy in Deshaun Watson, but that's what motivated that trade. How does the same front office come back and go like, hey, we're going back for somebody who they think could tap out realistically in that same range, right? Because then you're putting yourself in a position where we know you're not going to be satisfied with that level of quarterback play based on your history, right? Like if the Browns never traded for Baker Mayfield, let's say he got too expensive, they decided to draft the quarterback. This would make perfect sense. But they decided that they could not win with the guy that they thought would be around that range. I think Baker is comfortably in that like tier three vacations in tier two some years kind of place, right? How do you rectify what they did with Baker, the reasoning why they did with Baker, and then what the projected ceilings are with these quarterbacks, and then taking one there, right? Like it's a tough spot, like where it's
It's
like, hey, is it just the situation has made the bar dip?
I think the situation has made the bar dip a little bit, but I also think the NFL is coming around to the fact that if you don't have Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, I'll include Jaden Daniels for this conversation because Jaden took that team to the NFC Championship. If you don't have any of those guys, you have to make your offense QB proof. You can go and find a guy that can be in the tier
Mm.
two, and you have the requisite talent to go and win a Super Bowl. You can be a Jalen Hurts, who is not a top 10 quarterback by any means, but with the best roster in football, you can go win a Super Bowl. Jared
Yes.
Goff might not be a top 10 quarterback. He's around like 11 to 13, but that team before everybody got hurt was on the brink of of going to the Super Bowl. You can be a guy like I mean 2023 Brock Purdy with the most skilled offensive talent in the league. You can get those guys and make your offense quarterback proof. So I think more teams are going to go start going towards that
Mm,
and just being like, if we just get a guy who can drive the boat, like if we just get a guy who can keep the hands on the steering wheel and keep it straight, we
yeah.
don't need a guy who has to do all the master level QB stuff.
I get that. The one thing is like, if you look at a lot of those situations, these aren't quarterbacks who are taken by the team that they're successful with right now with early picks. I mean, Jared Goff went to the Lions on a value deal for Matt Stafford, where they picked up extra first to get him, right? You're talking about 7th round pick in Brock Purdy, 2nd round pick with Jalen Hurts. And like, I think, yeah, there is some credence to that idea. I'm a full believer in that idea. I just think part of that idea is saying, when I have the number 2 overall pick, I'm gonna have to take the best player available instead of taking a quarterback there, because once you take a quarterback at 2, you're kind of investing in that other philosophy, which is, hey, this guy is going to be a significant chunk of the resources that we use, so he has to be a disproportionate amount of the solution for the football team. And I think that like I hear that argument often, and that's the one part that just doesn't connect with me, where I'm like, hey, but you take the quarterback at 2, and that kind of throws out the balance of all of that, because you are basically using your top resource on a quarterback, which is kind of the opposite of what the teams who have achieved that method successfully have done, to be able to do that. So it is, I, I, I get the appeal, right? Because we did the scenario. It's like, damn, like you feel like you got to take the quarterback. I just wonder if you do that in 3 years, will you feel the same way about that decision? Because I have a lot of my guts telling me I feel like we're gonna regret this if we do it in 3 years. If the Browns do it, I hope it works out, obviously, and I'm wrong. But that's where I'm at, where I'm like, I just have too much telling me that I just don't think this is a good idea. You feel what I'm saying?
Yeah, I feel you, but I also think there's an example, same with Jared Goff. And before he got traded to the Lions, he
The
did help
Rams.
take the Rams to the Super Bowl. And I think that that's something that you're hoping for with these quarterbacks. I don't think any of these guys are going to be a quarterback that's like a win because of guy. You can win with these guys, and you have all the requisite talent around them.
Do you think you could replicate what the Rams did with Jared Goff early in his career without like having Sean McVay?
But there's the question. Do you have a Sean McVay? Do you
Yeah, and everybody
have the
gonna think they hot
playmakers? Do
Sean
you have the
McVay.
protection? And because everybody's drafting and because everybody's hiring a Sean McVay clone or like
Yeah,
a Kyle Shanahan clone, everybody thinks they have Sean McVay. It's going to be interesting to see. I
yeah.
think Stefanski and the Browns have shown that when everything is working outside of the quarterback, they can make the playoffs. Joe Flacco made the playoffs while being Joe Flacco. Nothing about Joe Flacco has changed or gotten better or worse. It's just that he was able to catch fire. And now, if you put a young guy in there, a guy who has the support of the staff and some of the requisite play calling, playmakers, and protection, who knows what you can do in the AFC North, where, of course, like it's a murderer's row, but a lot of these teams have question marks outside of
Mm-hmm.
maybe Baltimore, and even Baltimore has questions. There's not, there's an avenue where I could see the Browns drafting a guy at 2 and still building up that team around him to to a level where you can say, oh, they're winning with him, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I could see it happening. I wonder what their free agency looks like before they end up drafting a quarterback, even if they draft a quarterback, because some of their deals that they make will be very telling.
Yeah, well, if they just have Jacoby Brissett on the roster and they go into the draft, I already know that it's a quarterback at 2 or at 1, right?
If
They,
it's
they have made
Brissett,
their mind up. If it's Brissett or somebody like that, I'm like,
if
okay.
it's Kirk, it's probably gonna be a quarterback at 2.
You think
But
so with Kirk? I think that you could work. I think that they could convince themselves that they could work with Kirk, right? Kirk gonna come in there and be like, hey, I got injured week 10. Like, this ain't really who I was that last part of the season. Kevin gonna be in there. He gonna remember 2020, 2019 and the good times that he had. And also Kevin done dealt with the whole year of Jameis Winston, right? And it is well documented that those two just were not compatible personalities, right? Kevin is a very analytical guy. Jameis is a very spiritual man, right? Those two philosophies tend to crash, especially with Jameis applying his spirituality to football, right? God deliver me from these pick sixes. That's just not how Kevin sees this, right? So I can imagine Kevin just gets that old thing there. He's like, you know what, man? We could have rolled with Joe Flacco for a year if we needed to. What's different with Kirk? I know Kirk. We can roll. Look, we gonna draft some running backs. We gonna get some guards. This class got all the guards in the world. We gonna fix this run game, and I think we can sneak out this year, go over 500, and then next year, maybe who knows who falls to us or what we could trade up. Maybe Myles Garrett trade factors into that. All of these different things. I feel like there's a way you can talk yourself into it with Kirk in a way that you cannot do that with Jacoby Brissett.
Okay, so allow me to play devil's advocate. Kirk Cousins is going to be 37 years old.
Absolutely.
He's going to be 37, coming off another injury, and also never really looking comfortable unless he was playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, you take Kirk Cousins behind arguably a worse offensive line with worse weapons, arguably, than the Atlanta Falcons. Especially if
no, it's not arguably. It's definitely worse wide receivers than the Falcons.
Worse receiving weapons than the Falcons. You don't know if Nick Chubb's gonna come back. Myles Garrett wants to leave, and you're also in the AFC North. I don't think anything about that is conducive to more than a one year, like, let's see what happens. But that doesn't stop you from drafting a guy.
I get your point. But also, JP, what you just described there sounds like I'm going to have the number 1 overall pick next year. So, like, if it works out, then we good. If it doesn't, we even better than we do.
We're back.
We're just back. Lenore Sellers could win the Heisman. That's the actual Jalen Hurts comp. Like, yeah, we good. Like, Cade Klubnik go out there, throw for 50 touchdowns, bring Clemson back to glory. We just take a Cade. That looked like a perfect fit for me.
He wears orange already.
Yeah, he wears orange. We can forget about the other Clemson man, and we can move
the
on.
Last Clemson guy.
Hey, by the way, I saw somebody put up a 2016 carousel of all the champions there, and it was a picture of Alabama. And I was like, damn. Somebody got a note in their Slack about we cannot include a picture of that man.
Use anybody else from that team. Use Christian Wilkins if you want to.
Dog, Hunter Renfrow. He the one who caught it.
What's Hunter Renfrow doing nowadays? Certainly not what Deshaun is doing.